Every woman I've ever worked with has carried at least one story about why she can't change, why she can't sustain it, why she can't trust herself, why she can't leave, why she can't start over. And these stories, they feel like truth. They feel like facts, but they are not facts. They are very old, very practiced thoughts. And a thought that is thought over and over again becomes a deep-seated belief. And what we ultimately do and don't do with our life is largely directed by our beliefs. So today we're going to talk about that. Welcome to your daily hit of grace and grit, your quick dose of inspiration to kickstart your day. I'm Courtney Townley, and here is today's hit. Our brains are meaning-making machines. From the time we are young, we take experiences, especially painful, confusing, or repeated experiences, and we construct narratives around them to make sense of what happened and to protect ourselves from it happening again. The problem with this is that these narratives get encoded as truth. Again, they become beliefs. They run in the background, shaping what we attempt and what we don't attempt. They shape what we expect and what we allow ourselves to believe is possible. And in midlife, when so much about our life is genuinely changing, these old stories can become the most significant barriers standing between where we are and where we ultimately want to be. So I talk a lot about parenting the brain in my book, The Consistency Code. And one of the shifts that I use to help people use narrative that is more useful is a phrase that I first heard from Brené Brown. And it's the phrase, the story that I'm telling myself. It's a practice of naming the narrative that your brain is constructing in real time, especially in moments of difficulty or failure. Brené Brown found in her research that the most resilient people were not ones with no stories. They were the ones who had learned to examine their stories with curiosity rather than certainty or with conviction, right? Because sometimes we get so convicted to our stories, like this is the truth, but it's really just a story. So Brené writes that we are the authors of our lives. And that is not a comfortable metaphor, but an urgent one. If we don't examine and revise our stories, we are not passive characters in them. We are active participants in their perpetuation. So again, if this is a topic that feels meaty to you and that you really want to do a deep dive on, again, I cannot encourage you enough to go buy my book. And that's not just because I want you to buy my book. It's because I spend a whole chunk of my book talking about exactly this. But for the purpose of today's episode of this show, I'm going to give you a little thought management framework that I want you to take away. And I'm just going to give you 3 steps that work specifically with the stories that show up for you around health and self-care. So step 1 is, of course, naming your story. When you find yourself not doing something that you said you would do or wanted to do, like eating a healthy lunch, going for a walk, putting yourself to bed earlier, instead of moving straight to guilt, I want you to pause and ask yourself, what's the story that I'm telling myself right now? Because I'm willing to bet you're telling yourself a story that is inspiring you to not show up, to not do the thing. Write it down. It's even more powerful if you write it down. Give it full sentences. I can't because fill in the blank. People like me always fill in the blank. There's no point because fill in the blank. You are arguing for not doing the work. You are literally telling a story that is talking yourself out of the work. Get clear on what that story is. Step 2, examine the story. Asking 2 questions. First, is this a fact or is it an interpretation? Facts are verifiable. Facts are things that everyone who is looking at the same situation would agree are true. The wall is green. It is raining outside. It's 4:30 in the afternoon. Those are facts. Stories are constructed, right? So stories are what we tell ourselves about the facts. They're interpretations. The second question is, how old is the story? Because a lot of the stories that we're living by were written decades ago by a much younger version of ourselves in circumstances that no longer exist. And that is a powerful thing to recognize. And finally, step 3 is write a more useful story. I'm not saying a more positive one. We talked about that a few episodes ago. But a more useful story. One that reminds you of your capacity. One that reminds you of the version of yourself that can do this thing. Write a version of the story that talks you into the work rather than out of the work. I'm telling you, one of the most powerful things you can do for your health is not a new protocol or a better plan. It is an honest examination of the stories that you're telling yourself about your possibility and about your capability. You are the author, which means you get to revise the hell out of your stories. And I highly encourage that you do just that. Not because your stories are stupid or weak. They probably made sense at the time that they were written. But you are not who you were then, right? You're not now who you were then. And it's really high time, beyond high time, that your story catches up with who you are now. And I would say your story catches up with the version of you that you want to be. Like, do your storytelling from the version of yourself that you want to be. That is useful. That is effective. That will take your health to places you probably could never imagine. If this stirred something inside of you, imagine what a whole book of clarity and courage could ignite. The Consistency Code, a midlife woman's guide to deep health and happiness, goes even deeper into the mindset and practices that create real, meaningful change at midlife. Grab your copy today over at theconsistencycode.com and keep the momentum alive.